I want to start by going to Tania because I want a reality check. We need to know just how serious things have become in the humanitarian field and humanitarianism. And therefore, let's go to the German government and hear, because from 20 days' time, Germany will be on the Security Council, and we'll have the chair of the Security Council in April. We'll come back to that in a moment, Tania, but just your audit, please, of what the state of humanitarianism and human rights is in this disrupted world.
Well, thank you, Nick. And allow me not to start with the gloom and doom and the challenges, but to say that looking back at yesterday, there is a lot we have to celebrate so far as human rights are concerned and the protection of human rights and the civil society engagement for human rights. We had 70 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights yesterday. We had the adoption of the UN of the Global Compact on Migration. And as you mentioned already, we had the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to Nadia Murad and Denis Mukwege. And on top of all that, in the German Foreign Office, we yesterday awarded the German-French Prize for Human Rights and well, I don't know the German title, Rechtsstaatlichkeit, to rule of law, exactly, sorry, to one of 50 of the 15 prize winners this year, who happened to be Háwar al-Bunni, the Syrian human rights lawyer and activist who served in prison in Syria and who has dedicated his life to defending human rights activists in Syria. So it was a very moving and very timely award yesterday, and it only showed how many people globally are engaged for human rights, and that looking around in Berlin, interviewing for some video clips, young Germans on the Brandenburger Tor, in our Lichthof in the Foreign Office, everybody knew what to say on human rights, what human rights mean for them. And I think we've come a long way in the last 70 years, when 3 years after the end of the Second World War, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted.
But Tania,
so that's the good
I was going to say,
story.
Tania, thank you, well done for that.
Yeah,
but I now need the audit of the reality.
Yeah.
Because
well, that is the reality. It's not
half
all
the reality.
Doom and gloom. It's half the reality. The other part of the reality is that human rights need constant fighting, and that the system is indeed under strain and under stress. And Jeffrey Sachs just alluded to the role of the United States. They decided to leave the Human Rights Council in Geneva just this year, and while the US is still on a working level, working in the Human Rights Council, we have lost with the UN, with the US movement, a strong advocator in the system for human rights, and we've lost a lot of funding. Tom, you alluded to funding, and that does make a difference. So human rights all around the globe are under stress. There is also efforts by some countries to redefine human rights as no longer an individual right inherent to each and every person without the need to attain it. It's something you are born with. So there is stress in the system.
Stress, but is the system going to endure? When you become the chair of the Security Council in April, you can push forward an agenda, but you do have others on the Security Council who, frankly, are not great respecters of the kind of human rights we're trying to discuss here.
Well, you've put the finger on the problem, or you've pointed the problem. We will try to bridge a lot of gaps, and one of the gaps is inherent to the system, and that is that the UN Security Council, by definition, deals with classical crises and not human rights as such. So the human rights security nexus is something we put a lot of importance on, and we will try to do our utmost in our upcoming 2 years in the Security Council to make sure that human rights are mainstreamed into all of the UN Security Council's products.
Do you think it'll be a struggle, though? Because
it will be a struggle.
Because the direction of travel is difficult at the moment.
It is, and we have strong, permanent members of the Security Council which think otherwise, and we have examples of Sweden, the Netherlands, who were in the Security Council before us and who had big problems in advocating for human rights and for putting it on the agenda, but it does happen again and again, and we will make sure it does happen in April when we have the presidency of the Security Council, and we are set to talk about women, peace and security. We're set to talk about sexual violence in conflict, and that will happen. We will be bringing more briefers of the security into the Security Council of from the human rights system of the UN, something which does not happen often enough. So yes, we're going to do our best, supported by many other members of the Security Council.
Thank you for the moment, because tomorrow Wolfgang Ischinger, the chair of the Munich Security Conference, is coming here to open the proceedings and talk about the fragility, and he's chosen the title, "The World on the Edge of the Abyss."
Well, it may be on the edge of the abyss, but hopefully we can do something for human rights.
Düzen, let's come to you. I hope we've got the image of the extraordinary moment of Nadia Murad yesterday getting the Nobel Peace Prize. For those of us who've actually attended some of these Peace Prize events, it is extraordinary. I don't know how someone like that copes with it, because it is so formal and so ceremonial. But you have been doing an enormous amount of filmmaking, including with the Yazidis. And what I'd like to know is, there was the extraordinary moments when she returned, which were deeply emotional. We don't have them here on video, but I still remember the Yazidi predicament. Had it not been for mobile phones, we wouldn't have known about it. Dreadful things would have gone on unseen, and here you have the recognition. Tell us about what has now happened in Iraq since she managed to escape. Many of her family were killed. But is there a new stability? Is there hope in a place like that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this important initiative. And as a founder of an NGO which is based on an ongoing genocide, of course, I think our values are under threatened. And when I heard about the situation that Nadia has become a Nobel Peace Prize winner, it was a very big moment for all of us, for all Yazidis and all women, I think, in the world who has been victims of sexual war as a weapon of war. But on the other hand, I myself had to remember for the first time when I saw Nadia Murad. That was 4 years ago in a small tent not far away from the front line where Daesh was killing my people. And the fact that I became a founder of an NGO which is based on the ashes of genocide means that at that moment no one was interested in a genocide which was happened in the 21st century. And that was the reason why I, in August 2014, went there to Iraq, to my roots, and to talk about what is happening to my people, and became overnight a war reporter and come back as a human rights activist. So what was very interesting was that Nadia Murad was the only woman and the first woman who was ready to speak about what was happening to her. And that was a very difficult moment for us, because I didn't just went there as a journalist, I also went there as a member of this religious minority, as a Yazidi woman. And the moment when she gave me the chance to talk to her without hidden camera, I had different feelings. It was like we knew very good that we had to break a taboo right now. She by telling her story with an open face, and me as a Yazidi journalist who is doing that. And it was like we have also many Oriental patriarchal way of thinking in our Yazidi religious people, and it was like you can't do that. And now, 4 years after that, and with the fact that Nadia became Nobel Peace Prize winner, that was a big moment of being proud.
But she was one of 3,000.
She was one of 3,000, and therefore, this is on the one hand, this is a big moment for the Yazidi people.
Who've been through terrible trauma.
Yes, but on the other hand, we have a lot of Nadia Murads who don't have the voice till today, who are disappear. We don't know where they are. They have been slaved and sold in other countries, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Many of them killed themselves by suicide. Many of them, like we are talking about children, who became pregnant, and it's a very horrible situation. And what we try to do with our NGO, of course, is to take the light, to put into this ongoing genocide, still without rights. So you were asking about the current situation. the situation is very challenging because the Yazidi people...
What do you mean by challenging?
Challenging because they don't have any rights. So as minority of minorities, the Yazidi have been killed because they are Yazidis. So there's a mutual understanding, of course, between us and the Armenian people from the Aurora dialogue, which I knew before. And therefore, I think they need us, the international community, and especially the watchdogs who take care of them because they don't have any rights. So all over the world, everyone is knowing what is happening to the Yazidi people, but no one is standing there for them.
Well, look, I've come to you because here on my left I've got Tania, and she's along the road at the Auswärtiges trying to create policy and lead policy on this. You're seeing it right from the gritty, nasty ground where terrible things have been happening and continue to happen. What's the challenge for the policymakers when there is this overhang, this real weakness of humanitarian law and humanitarianism now?
I think we could not, we don't have time to, we don't have so much time to lose time. So I think because of the facts of the mass graves of the people who are ready to talk about what is happening. So many women we take care of said to me, we are not ill. I don't need medicine. My medicine is justice. I want to speak and loud to the criminal court and to talk about what is happening to me, what was happening to me, what the name of my perpetrator is, but no one is interested in it. And that is the second genocide, I think.
But is it really no one is interested?
Because it is
governments
very,
are
very difficult, because till today it is very difficult to begin this persecution, yes, because of Iraq, the government of Iraq, and also because of the government of Kurdistan. And it is not because they don't want to. I think they have many own problems. And of course, it's complicated. To be at the front line in a war is not black or white. It's always complicated. Just an example. The villages which are the women are from, for example, Nadia Murad and all the other women are from Kocho. So the perpetrators not just was the Daesh fighters, it was also many neighbors who become traitors. But the current situation is that many of that neighbors who become traders turned back to the villages in Kocho without being persecuted by that. And therefore, of course, there's a big question for the Yazidi community. What is about our situation? Who is looking for us?
All right, here you have the contrast then between the political reality and the really gritty and unpleasant reality, the desperate reality on the ground. Chairwoman Özdemir, when you look at these contrasts and your own political position and the position of politicians like you, and you see, even if we're being a bit modest about it at the moment or a bit restrained about it, a real potential of international law not being upheld, and a respect for international law and a respect for humanitarianism and human rights, even 70 years and one day after the Declaration of Human Rights. Do you fear that actually it's moving in a direction which cannot be reversed?
Well, this is all happening because we allow that to happen. You know, it's not given by God, it's us who allow that. So we can be the same people to stop that. And I listened very carefully to what our foreign ministry is doing, and I really applaud that, and I really cheer that, and I think that's extremely important. But let's be a bit more concrete. You know, the liberal democracies are under threat currently. Unfortunately, we have more and more countries not far away in Europe, take Hungary, take Poland, take Italy, take our neighbor Austria, that are more or less controlled by authoritarian regimes. And there's a center, the center of illiberal democracy or illiberal systems, and that's in Russia. They try to intervene via cyber war with other means and try to make the whole world looking like they want to see it, against liberal democracies. And then I come back to us. When the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister was invited to the Foreign Ministry here, and she said, I'm under threat by Saudi Arabia because I spoke out in favor of human rights. Our government did not support her. She waited for support, but she did not get the necessary support. She asked us and said, we liberal democracies have to stand together. I think that was a big mistake. It changed after Khashoggi case, but how long will it stay? Let's be honest. After some weeks, when we forget about Saudi Arabia, will we normalize, quote unquote, again, our relations with Saudi Arabia? We shouldn't. We should talk a language that these people understand. And the language is no European country, at least those who consider them as liberal democracies. I cannot speak for Poland or Hungary or any of the other countries that switch sides. But those who are still on the camp of liberal democracies should not deliver arms to Saudi Arabia or any of those countries who are involved in the war in Yemen.
But Chairman, let me just press you. Let me just press you, but please answer the question about whether this is an irreversible trend.
No, it's up to us. I mean, look at what Russia is currently doing in the Ukraine. We're talking about, this is not nice, please don't do this, we don't like this. Well, that doesn't impress Mr. Putin. Our government could do something. Why don't we stop Nord Stream 2? Nobody forces us to do this and be more depending from Russian gas and at the same time bypass Ukraine. We're even helping Mr. Putin to bypass the Ukraine. So it's us. We can take this decision or we can take that decision. And unfortunately, we're very good with lip service in favor of liberal democracies. But when it comes to concrete measures, I don't see my own country, I don't see other European countries to take the necessary steps in order to make the evil people clear that we want to defend our liberal democracies. If we don't defend liberal democracies, we will watch it continuing one by one, going into the hands of the others.
Bleak. All right, Wolfgang Huber, your perspective on this, given the reality we've just heard from the Yazidis, the reality we've just heard from Cem, particularly about what is happening here in Europe and what is happening with authoritarian, autocratic regimes who are seizing the media, making it difficult. There's a whole editorial today in the New York Times about how it's very difficult now, despite what we've heard from Düzen, it's very difficult now for journalists to cover issues of human rights because they're under threat themselves, whether it's been in the Philippines or elsewhere.
Well, I think it's necessary to make very clear we have not one reality. The reality of those who stand for human rights is also a part of the reality, and we need a clear networking between them, and we need solidarity between them. Therefore, Aurora is so important in my view because it's a very important part in the international network of those who stand for human rights and humanitarian activities. And I follow the line of Cem Özdemir from this perspective to insist with regard to the governments that their primary responsibility is their responsibility to protect the lives of human beings. And this is the basic consequence of what they all declared with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 70 years ago. The equal dignity of human beings begins with the physical life and integrity of those human beings. And for me, it is a scandal that in the United Nations, responsibility to protect is a wording formally approved and adopted 13 years ago, I think, in 2005. And the only thing what was really discussed was in which cases military means have to be used to protect. But the protection of human life begins much earlier. It begins in the specific responsibility of the governments. And my idea is that we should not only speak about compliance rules for industry, what is very important, but also compliance rules for governments. And if we stand for that, then indeed, in the case of Saudi Arabia, it's correct that no single arms trade should go to Saudi Arabia, not from Germany, not from France, to name two of the four biggest arms traders in the world, and to be clear in these points, to say, well, we stand for compliance rules for governments, that the responsibility to protect the life of the people living in their borderlines is their first responsibility, and we take that as an element as important as the Sustainable Development Goals.
Now, Tanya, I'm going to come to you. You're in a moment, but you're not a politician. You're, of course, a public servant.
And under control.
Excuse me, but I don't understand the alternative between a politician and a civil servant. The civil servant...
I didn't finish my question.
The civil servant is a politician in the sense in which we all, as citizens of our countries, are political animals and politically responsible.
What I'm putting on the record is I'd like to come to you in a moment, but I'd like to come, Tom, to you. But can we also go to Cho Huyong as well? Can we get the microphone, Daniel? Because I'd like to ask you about what you think has happened to the Rohingyas, given what we've seen at the United Nations. I want it to be quite brief, but I need to hear from you about the respect for human rights. I'm going to come to you in one moment, because Tom, what we've seen in the Nuba Mountains, of course, you are providing the human right of good health. And when I think you made a brief passing reference to the security situation in the Nuba Mountains. What have you seen there? Because obviously Somalia and Sudan or the whole Horn has been such a desperate place and still is in many ways.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Sudan a few years ago was a rogue nation. Nobody wanted to deal with Sudan. Omar Hassan al-Bashir was indicted as a war criminal, and that seems to have all gone away. Now he's everybody's buddy. You know, he's friends with the EU, he's friends with the US, because they're getting something out of him now. He's providing some form of counterterrorism to the US. They're giving him a free ride. Sanctions were lifted. They're up now for being taken off the state sponsor of terrorism list. For the EU, their issue is immigration. They want to stop the flow of migrants across the Sudan desert into Libya, into the Mediterranean and up. They gave a lot of money to Sudan to stop the flow of migrants. They became Bashir's friend because Bashir could stop this flow of migrants. So these issues that were important to them, when that comes up and they have important issues of their own making, they forget about human rights. Because of this, all the money's got into the Rapid Support Force, which is the reconstituted Janjaweed in Sudan. And they're able to go on and make war in Darfur and make war against us in the mountains. So human rights takes a back seat to national interests. I think that's probably the most important.
What should be done to put it on the front seat?
I think since we're talking about the Declaration of Human Rights, remember that the sanctity of life should take precedence over everything, over business, over trade, over everything else in life. So if you don't value life, if you look at it that the life of an American, the life of a European is worth more than the life of someone in the mountains, now you've got a big problem. So I think this is the role of civil society, this is the role of religion, to reinforce that there's nothing more sacred than human life.
Let me just go. Let's have another reality check of what's happened to the Rohingyas. And you come from Sitwe, 760,000. And the UN Special Rapporteur and the Special Commission made very clear that this was genocide. What have you experienced? Bring us up to date about whether anything has changed, or has it changed for the worse now?
Yes, it is clear that the repatriation is not yet done by the government, and also this UN didn't allow them to return to their own land because Myanmar government didn't give any security to these IDPs so that they cannot return. Because no security, no nothing for them, or all the properties of them, these IDPs are also looted by the other community. So the government didn't take any action against these kind of cases. So people should not go back to their own land. Otherwise, the government didn't accept that they are the...
When you heard Wolfgang Huber remind us of the responsibility to protect, RTP, and there was a blatant inability to help the Rohingya community, what was happening this time last year particularly?
They didn't get any protection by the government. They are fear to come back to their own land, and also the government didn't accept them as the citizen of this country. So in previous, since 1948, all the government accept that all the Rohingyas are the citizens of this Myanmar. They can vote, and also they can stand for parliament member. Now this government is also denying all the citizenship of these people. So they have no protection and nothing, so that they doesn't want to come back to their own land.
But let me just press you one more time about what the international community could have done, apart from trying to do what they've been doing in Cox's Bazar with literally 1 million people living in mud and squalor. That's picking up the bits after the most dreadful events, much of which was never seen. 6 generals named for this, picking up what Wolfgang has just said. What more could have been done to uphold the rights of the Rohingya this time last year?
International community should give pressure to Myanmar government to protect them, and also to accept all these people as the citizen of Myanmar.
But they didn't even allow the special rapporteur in to see it.
But they are afraid of their protection, all these people, even though in Sittwe we are living under threat and under fearness. So we are not free from the fearness. Even Aung San Suu Kyi wrote a book, Freedom from Fear. So I send message to her that we are not living such. She wrote a book, such kind of, we are not giving protection even in Sittwe. So I don't know whether in Mount Butidong they won't get any protection from the government side.
We'd be talking about the Rohingyas and what's happened in your country even if you weren't here. So it's fantastic that you are here and you've been recognized for all the work that you've done. But let me ask the panel, what should have been done, what could have been done? Picking up, Wolfgang, what you said, Cem, what you've said as well, and what you've seen, Düzen, with the Yazidis, what could the international community have done to actually intervene, to uphold human rights and humanitarianism with something like the Rohingyas, which everyone knew was going to happen at some point?
International community should ask...
okay, give me your answer quickly. Quickly.
Ask the Myanmar government why they accept these people nearly 60, 70 years, they're citizens of Myanmar. Now why they are denying their citizenship?
I think that's been made pretty clear. But we have a let's talk about the humanitarian side for the moment. Can I just ask the panel, please?
Yes.
In my own experience, I think we have to fight for our values, our democratic values in Europe, also in the Middle East and worldwide.
But what do you mean by fight for values?
Fight for values means stand up for democracy, stand up for people who are under threatened. And for example, I write a book 2 years ago with the title Germany Under Threatened, why we have to fight for our values. And without my experience at the front line by dehumanization of people, this book would not be possible. So therefore, I think we have to be more consequent, for example. So when we are talking about human rights with people from the Middle East, especially in Iraq, no one is really believing in that because their reality is the opposite of that. So I think we have to be more realistic to talk about what is more important, geopolitical interests and money, or really human rights. And I think this kind of discussions have to be more and more. And of course, we have to take care of people who are in need and who are voiceless. And also, for example, a few years ago when we were talking about Yazidi people, no one was interested in it because it's far away, it's not my problem, it's not my fault. But we have to understand that we have to help the people of helping by ourselves. So we call ourselves secure and safe, but many people don't see as that.
But I've got to keep pushing you all. How could we have stopped that? Because now it's not just about the camps and the mud and the awful conditions in cyclones and so on, it's about industrialized sexual activity as well. well. So it's a much bigger thing, and this, after what Nadia Murad has been recognized for her campaign on that. I'm trying to push you. Should there have been some kind of international intervention? Whether politically it would have been achievable is another matter.
Of course it should be, and I thought in myself that the United Nations have been born because of exactly that reason. So therefore the question will be, where are the United Nations at that moment, and where is the help for the people who are in need? And it's the same like the Rohingya, ran through the same things like the Yazidi people. It begins with dehumanization, raping, and the pictures of enemies. And therefore I think we have to do more than we are doing today.
Chair, what could have been done when you look back? This time a year ago, 15 months ago, there was an inevitability. The Rohingyas were on the move in their own country, even though the Myanmar government says they shouldn't be there in the first place. But what could have been done by the international community to uphold human rights and humanitarianism?
Unfortunately, I think the Security Council would not have given green lights to an international intervention to stop that from happening. China would have blocked that because China is behind the regime and supporting the regime. Probably Russia as well would have vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution. And I have to admit, we all, were cheering the president of Myanmar, as a human rights defender, as a hero, and oversaw the dark light, oversaw what was happening with the Rohingya.
And Nobel laureate.
I remember the New York Times that I think first covered that story, and then later other newspapers followed up. But it took a very long time for all of us to realize what was happening to the Rohingya. So we owe you guys apologies. And I think at least what we could do is that those people who were involved in the crimes should be punished. They should be taken accountable, and that is true for everybody.
But
so as soon as they enter my country, as soon as these people are entering European soil, they should be put into prison. It should be clear that this is not without consequences. That's the least thing we can do. And of course, if you want to solve that problem, we have to talk to China. And again, one country alone cannot make a difference. But if you need a proof why we need a European foreign and defense policy, here is an example. This is a reason. I come back to my initial point that liberal democracies need to speak out jointly, not one country and the other abstains. We need to have a common European position on those cases, and then I think we can make a difference. If one country does it, what will happen is, we've seen this on so many cases, you just take the other country, you bypass this country. But if we as European Union can manage that one day a European foreign affairs minister is more important than a national foreign affairs minister, we're 500 million people. That would make a difference in the rest of the world.
But let me press you. In Naypyidaw, what would have made them think twice about what had been going on for many months, but often in secret? What would have made them think twice to stop pushing almost a million out?
At least we should have tried to go to the Security Council, push in the Security Council for a resolution. Probably, to be honest, we wouldn't have got a green light by China and probably by Russia as well. But at least we should have tried to go to the Security Council and make sure that we're seeing it and that we're not going to do as nothing happened.
Wolfgang Huber.
There is a 200 years old saying of a great philosopher: only if the violation of human rights on one place on the earth is realized and felt at all other places, only then we will have a reality of human rights. That was said in 1795 by Immanuel Kant. Nowadays, we can realize what he expected because we have the means to communicate about gross violations of human rights on one place in all other places. But it is our responsibility as members of civil society. And in my conviction, it is a special responsibility of religious bodies and communities to communicate that, because the institutionalized communication alone doesn't do it. We had your example. We need early warning systems within civil society and religious communities.
But in this social media age and this transparent age, much is very evident now.
But in the social media, these are the most ambiguous media we have nowadays because we have everything in them. And no one gets clarity by them because these are so contradictory informations in the social media. In this sense, these social media are not social media because there is no social conscience that filters, so to speak, what is present in the social media. And therefore we need, however, today, face-to-face communication. We are dependent on our peers who help us to come through the jungle of the social media and to understand what is real information and what is not.
But I have to press you, how could the generals have been stopped this time last year in Myanmar?
To speak frankly, only if we had not began only last year to understand what happened, but had an information about the situation in Myanmar before, better than we had it, because it was prepared already. Because only then social groups, social institutions, religious communities have the chance to mobilize people and to organize pressure towards politics.
Now, Tania, you're going to be involved in drafting instructions to the German presidency of the Security Council. What would happen if this happened in April next year?
Well,
there are plenty of other things.
Let me start by
start
saying I
then.
share the frustration voiced in this panel and in the audience. I think we all feel the human need to be able to do more, and we feel the restraints of not being able to do more. And more often we deal with the consequences rather than stop it from happening. We have been dealing with the consequences of the genocide on the Yazidis in Iraq and parts of Syria and Kurdistan, same as with the Rohingyas. One of the topics which was discussed in this panel was impunity and the problems of impunity and the fact that there seems to be impunity which doesn't have any effect on stopping people from acting in a violent way. And the international community has tackled this problem, even in cases where the International Criminal Court in Den Haag is not applicable, as it is not in Syria, as it is not in Myanmar, because both countries are not party to the treaty. In both cases, the Human Rights Council in Geneva created mechanisms. For Syria, the IIIM mechanism, and for Myanmar recently, just in September, October, a special mechanism which is aimed at going to the country, going to the refugee camps, and gathering information on the atrocities that have happened on each and every specific case, to file them, to have them ready in the cases where we can eventually prosecute. And in the case of Syria, for instance, also with the help of yesterday's prize winner of the German-French prize on human rights, he has provided evidence, he has provided testimonials for Syrian generals to be prosecuted in Germany. And we have 2 cases already where this is happening. So it is possible not to feel without any power to prosecute atrocities as happened to the Yazidis or as is happening to the Rohingyas right now.
But that doesn't seem to dissuade them from doing it in the first place.
Maybe not, but that's always the problem with judicial systems. They do not really stop everybody from committing crimes, but at least they can prosecute at some point. And the problem of impunity is one of the big issues in situations as we find the Yazidis to be in, or the Rohingyas at them. So something is happening. It's certainly not enough. Whatever the international community does, if we do it after the fact, it is always too little. We should have stopped it before. It is not always possible. But we are taking action, and even you mentioned the situation of journalists. Just last week, in the OSCE Ministerial Council in Milano, we finally managed, and nobody really expected it, to pass a resolution in the third dimension, that is the human rights dimension. We managed to come up with conclusions on the rights of journalists, something which we didn't expect to happen. It hasn't been possible to pass any conclusions on the third dimension for a couple of years. It did happen this year.
So we're talking about the rights of journalists. I have been a journalist for many years, but this is the point the New York Times makes today. When you look at Duterte in the Philippines, he says, if you go to that area, we'll kill you. And it's fascinating watching and sinister watching what's happening in Turkey, because they're worried about Khashoggi and who killed him. But of course, large numbers of journalists are held indefinitely. And it's not a place for freedom of speech, as all of us know up here. I'd like to come to others here for the next 10 minutes. But finally, responsibility to protect. I saw on the video briefly Gareth Evans, who was one of the great authors, and he was there, I think, in 2017 at the Aurora Dialogues. I mean, if he was here, and I saw him in Canberra not so long ago, and also in London, he's now Chancellor of the ANU, having been head of the International Crisis Group. And every time I see him, I say, is responsibility to protect dead? And he says, no, it's not dead, but it needs political urgency. It needs political determination to use it. Is that possible, do you think?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstances, but yes, I think the responsibility to protect and the principle of humanitarian intervention is one of our big responsibilities.
Right. Let's get a couple of voices, please. Who's got the microphones, please? One here and one in the middle. Right. Don't make long speeches because we've only got a limited amount of time and we're all going to be together tomorrow. Please.
Sasha Chanoff with Refuge Point. I lead an organization that finds lasting solutions for refugees. One of the solutions for the few is resettlement to a country like Canada, Germany, the US, Australia, or other places. Düzen, what opportunities are there for Yazidi in Germany or in Canada or in other places to raise the human rights issues for their communities in those countries that have the opportunity to take action on the global stage?
Düzen, just hold that one, please. Next one.
Responsibility, protect, from my point of view, unfortunately, for political reasons, is in recess. So
would you like to introduce yourself?
Hans-Jochen Schmidt, former civil servant of the Foreign Office.
Say that again, and your point is?
It's in recess. Responsibly protect, and it needs political support, but there is not enough political support at the moment to master.
Is it on life support? Do you think it's on life support?
On life support?
No, do you think responsibility to protect is sort of on life support, talked about, but actually pretty ineffectual?
It's unfortunately not talked enough. Inside the UN family, it was the General Assembly, and as far as I heard, let's say the politicians at the moment are not in favor of.
Thank you, please.
Tania, I'm from Burma, a fellow with Uncle Chola on here. I'm a Buddhist supporting the Muslims. On the responsibility to protect, that was the outcome of the failure of the international community, particularly the UN, to stop the genocide in Rwanda. But taking a step back very briefly, I think on the 9th of December, 70 years ago, the Genocide Convention as an interstate treaty was adopted. And for 50 years, the entire world shelved that document out of the Cold War logic. Cambodian genocide, Chinese genocide in 1965 under Suharto, 1971 Bangladesh genocide by West Pakistan.
But now?
Now it's not pursued either. Almost 150 member states of the United Nations have signed or ratified this document. This is not just an empty statement of principle. This is an interstate treaty.
Thank you.
So we are trashing the treaties that have been signed by the great nations.
Tania, give us your view on the status of the Genocide Convention. But first of all, Düzen, the issue there of Yazidis and the kind of potential that there is to help them.
So we have something very important in common, for example, with the Jewish people. And this is the fact that we have been dehumanized since we have been born and since we have been there. So that what happened against us with Daesh is happening since we are here centuries of years. But the big difference is that compared to the Jewish people, we don't have a holy book. We don't have this Torah. So the fact that the Jewish people were able to live in diaspora was because of this holy book. We don't have this book, so our holy place, of course, is the region, and to survive means that we have to stay there, because this is our holy city there, not far away from Mosul. And the problem which I see is when some of the Yazidi people go to Canada, the other to Australia, the other ones to Germany, we will disappear. We will not survive. That will be the third genocide. This is what we are doing to ourselves, because we don't know so much about our own religion, because it was a religion under threatened. It was a religion because of surviving and having fear. And it's the same situation, and therefore we need a solution exactly at the place where it happens. And therefore, for example, we, with our NGO, as Yazidi woman who was born and raised in Germany, have a project. It calls Back to Life for 840 women who were in the hands of ISIS. Is multi-religious, with Muslim women, with Christian women, Yazidi women. This is a big moment for our Yazidi people, because not everyone is okay with that, and it was a big fight to make that clear. But we try to help the people directly there where it happens. So we have our project Back to Life directly in an IDP camp, with sewing courses, with literary courses and things like that, to empower them at the place where they are. And this will also be an international question when we don't want to disappear one of the oldest religion in the world.
Thank you. The Genocide Convention.
Well, let me start by saying that the danger of genocide is something which rings very strongly in Germany. If we are aware and fear a genocide has happened, we are called to action. Humanitarian intervention, for instance, was the legal argument for the intervention of NATO in Kosovo. Which led to, and I'm picking up what Cem Özdemir said, which birthed European security and defense policy at the time. That came out of it. How to react to a genocide, I think, is very difficult, and even from those who have first-hand experience of this here in the room, I have not really had a template of what to do. Much what we can do is sanctions. That instrument is being used in many cases. It's been used against Russia. I think it's also been used against the identified Myanmar generals, and we can put pressure on countries. Is the answer going to war, as we did in Kosovo? I'm not sure.
Cem, do you think...
So,
sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Do you think it's clear, there is now, the G word was talked about a lot in many terrible events in the last 20 or 30 years, but it never got to that definition which would allow it to be used. Do you think there's now a greater willingness to use that word, therefore categorize the horror of what is taking place, which therefore puts more pressure on those you know well in the Bundestag and elsewhere in Parliament?
Well, yes, but we do not agree, obviously, on the international stage. As you can see, power politics is back, and you know, there is no such thing as empty space in international politics. It's always filled. Syria is an example for that. I admire President Obama a lot, but when he said that when chemical weapons are used, a red line is crossed and something has to happen. And what happened? Nothing happened. So this gap was filled by Mr. Putin, it was filled by Iran. So whenever you want to have peace there, unfortunately, Mr. Putin will sit at the table and the Iranian regime will sit at the table. So this is a proof that every decision has consequences. Iraq, a military intervention based on false information, had consequences, also because there was no plan for the day after and it was based on lies. But the non-intervention in Syria as well has consequences. So what I would say is that we have to think through. And there is no such thing as we don't want to see, and then it has no consequences for us. Syria had dramatic consequences for us. Think of the refugees. Think of all the states that are meanwhile destabilized, that are in the hands of the extreme right. So obviously there is always a link to what happens in the world to us. So my conclusion would be coming back to Myanmar, because the Buddhist religion in the West sometimes is portrayed as the other religion, the peaceful religion of people hugging each other, kissing each other, and being so nice to each other. Well, if there is a God above, I believe that he has distributed evil and everything bad equally under all religions, under all groups. And that's why it's important that also the religious leaders within their religions fight back extremism.
We're under time pressure, but I can see there are several people. I'd love to get as many voices as possible. Ruben, do you want to come in quickly?
If I may very quickly just say a few words why we started this project. In 2014, when we saw in Deir Zor in Syria, in the same desert where 1 million Armenians was killed, the same story is repeating again. It cannot be just ignoring again. And Elie Wiesel, our first co-chair of the Aurora, said, I think in great words, he said, the biggest problem in the world, not about crime or hateness, is indifference. The opposite of love is not hateness, is indifference. The opposite of the beautiful is not the ugly, is indifference. Indifference was killing everything. And I think one thing I want to say for all of us, as indifference coming, we're always hoping that the government needs to do, UN, Secretary of Security Secretary. No, it's we all. I was 7 months ago in Armenia when the revolution happened. And I saw how people who've been ignorant, absolutely in depression, changed the country leadership just because we become not indifferent. This is why I say indifference, main challenge, what we all needs to consider our major task, how we can become, with all this pressure of the bad news, our work, our family problems, how we can make not indifference what's happening in the other part of the world.
Thank you, Ruben. Can we move the microphone to the front? Please, Roland.
My name is Roland Schatz. I'm the Senior Advisor to the UN Director General in Geneva. I would like to get back to what Jeff said. If you remember, he said there are two things we don't need to get gray hair about. Number one, there's enough money to implement the SDGs, and there's enough know-how to do it. But we are still talking about the same problems in 2018 as we were in 2008 and the 10 years before. Why? Because we know within the United Nations that the Security Council is not the solution. The base of the Security Council is wrong and it is not working. And for that, I would like to come back to what Wolfgang said. And I would like to ask you to think about what you could do in order to build something in parallel to the Security Council. Our organization was asked to help Boko Haram. There's a solution to get the girls finally free. I passed it on to our friends at the United Nations. The response was, after I had to insist several times and Michael Müller had to insist several times, 3 weeks of doing nothing, the response was, we don't want to help you free the girls because there are elections in Nigeria, and if we free the girls now, this would be in support of the government. Everybody who has 2 girls, as I have, this answer is no answer. This is shocking. And I would like to have you start to work with the Grand Mufti of Egypt and others, that you form a parallel organization where when we have situations like this, the religious communities have to stand up and find a solution.
Wolfgang.
Why am I saying that? Nobody is aware of, I can't disclose who was the partner of that, but the Politburo in China asked a religious friend of mine to speak with the Politburo because the president of China, together with his guys, have realized that they screwed it, that China is not working, and that they need the dialogue with the faith communities back, and they asked this friend to moderate that. So here's your moment in history where you can bring trust back to the faith communities which you have lost over the last decades.
The trust of the faith communities. I'll come back to that in a moment, and I just want one more intervention, please.
I think...
We're hearing you.
I think human rights and human dignity is a construct of convenience. When nations have their self-interest, it suits them to see it. And when it doesn't suit them, they don't see it. Today, I think the biggest crisis we face is not the designs of the evil, but the silence the willful silence of the good. And I think all of us are part of that willful silence. And until and unless we don't make a non-negotiable pledge to our own selves that humanity is non-negotiable, and that's a construct that each one of us have to have, I don't think anything can change.
You don't think anything can change? Okay, we'll look for the final remarks. Willful silence there. Wolfgang, just pick up that business of the trust in faith or lack of trust in faith.
Well, I agree with you that the history of the 20th century is one of the big examples for the ambiguity of religions with regard to the protection of human life and human dignity. And therefore, they themselves have to go through a process of learning and self-critique in order to be prepared to do what you proposed. And my deep conviction is that the attitude in which they have to do it is not an attitude of Überlegenheit, of superiority, but an attitude of self-critique and critical analysis of the mistakes and sins of their own tradition. Speaking for a Christian church, I say among my basic convictions is the conviction that the church herself is a sinner and has to accept that in order to really accept the impulses of their religious conviction, the impulses of the gospel in the case of Christian churches, the impulse of love to your neighbor as to yourself because you are loving God, and then to find people of other convictions and to work together with them. There the difficulty is that we did not yet learn to find a common ground, realizing the differences between the different religions. We always think we have first to say all religions have the same belief. That's not true. They are different. But however, they have to find their common responsibility in the defense of the equal integrity of every human person, irrespective of their different faith convictions.
Thank you. Okay, one more intervention there, but I want you all to be thinking about that willful silence from Sanita, and what also Ruben said about, we were down this track a few years ago, and look how little is changing. So let me just hear from you quickly, please.
Florian Westphal of the German section of Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF. This year alone, more than 2,100 people have drowned in the Mediterranean as they're fleeing Libya. This has happened with European governments at times preventing, criminalizing, or at least willfully ignoring any humanitarian efforts to rescue these people. I was just wondering to what extent Europe still has the credibility of actually being the standard bearer and the role model that others can follow.
Can we inject that in tomorrow? Because
Sure.
I think that automatically leads to something which we're planning to look at tomorrow. So let's just file that for overnight, if we may. Before I just get that willful silence, final thought from you, Tom. I mean, you mentioned the Janjaweed. And given the awfulness of what they were doing in the north of the country, has the threat of action against them, has it quelled them in any way? Has it restrained them in any way? Has it emboldened them? In other words, 10 years ago, we were talking, 5 years ago, we were the awfulness of what the Janjaweed were doing. What has changed, and have they listened in any way, particularly as they're well connected now digitally? Do they understand that actually they probably couldn't get away with it now?
No, actually, the Janjaweed just changed their name. They're now called the Rapid Support Force, the RSF. They changed the name and they got money from the EU to stop flow of migrants. So the only thing that's changed is they've gotten richer. They've changed the name to RSF.
So the Rapid
Support Force.
The Rapid Support Force for the EU.
Right, exactly.
No, seriously, I mean,
yeah.
so they're a Rapid Support Force for who?
Rapid Support Force, they're in the Khartoum government. They're under the security services. So it's like a paramilitary force under the security service in Khartoum. It's not under the military.
Okay.
So they're officially under the security guys. They used to be called Janjaweed, now they're called Rapid Support Force. They changed the name because the Janjaweed had a bad reputation. So changed the name.
But same people.
Same guys, yep. same people.
And do they understand the laws of war and that?
No, they're outside the Geneva Convention and other things because they're not a real, they're not under the Sudan army.
Okay.
So they sort of fall outside that, outside those laws, and they don't follow anything.
Well, thank you for that reality check. I didn't know that was the answer when I asked you the question. Okay, Chairman, the willful silence, which we've heard from Sunita, all four of you, the willful silence on humanitarianism and human rights.
Well, I think Ruben has said everything that needs to be said. It's all on us, and you know, sometimes we have to deliver several goals at the same time. Of course, we have a humanitarian responsibility vis-à-vis Africa and the people that we have to save their lives. It's a shame for us when people are losing their lives in the Mediterranean. At the same time, I want to add something into the picture. We're also in charge of surviving as liberal democracies in Europe. And one of the root causes that is used by the extreme right and sometimes, by the way, also by the extreme left is, unfortunately, the refugee crisis. So what we need to do, probably you have to follow up in that debate because we don't have time to go deeper into that, is two things at the same time. We need a humanitarian policy, but we also need to have order, because if we lose order, we won't have any humanitarian policy. So that's the difficulty in which we are. We're under an incredible threat that I would have never thought before that I will witness that one day. And in such a situation of a threat with misinformation from inside your country, because we have these guys already in our parliaments, and from outside our country, we have to try to be rational, give our people the necessary information, but at the same time do our job as good as possible, that people have the trust that we're under control of things.
Düzen, willful silence.
I think the genocide of the Yazidi people has been recognized because of the bravery of the women who break the silence. This is the reason, this is the difference, and this is something really new, not just in our own religion, it's in the history of everyone. For example, many Christian women who have been raped don't talk about what happened to them, and they are still in the hands of ISIS. But the Yazidi people knew very good that that was the last chance, and that was the reason for breaking the silence, and this is the reason why the world recognized that the genocide is happening. But the second step must be justice and to help and to support the women who break the silence. So therefore I think this is a really, really important part of the solution.
Tania, final thought about that phrase, because you will be in the UN Security Council and you will be the chair. How far do you believe you can go when there's a crisis or something which is clearly a violation of human rights, which is potentially genocidal, and it's much more visible these days?
Well, I think for one thing, I could be almost paralyzed by what I've been hearing here and how little we as states can actually do. But of course we're not. We're trying to work with the instruments we have and with the possibilities we have. And I think
But it requires political will.
That is what I was coming to. Political will is a word we haven't heard in this discussion so far, and I think it's at the basis of what we have to do. We have to have the political will to act. And to have the political will to act also means you have to have the peoples of your nation willing to have you as a government act. And I think that is where civil society, and there's a lot of civil society representatives here, play a crucial role in order to build political support to generate the political will to act. Governments do not act in isolation. They act on behalf of nations, of their electorate, and the political will to act has to filter down, but it cannot only be a top-down, it has to also be a bottom-up approach.
But that challenge, the events often move much faster than you can ever get political will together.
I think that's what you're describing is going to be the biggest challenge we will be facing in the 2 years in the Security Council, how to generate enough support in the Security Council for action as needed in a given situation, and then to act in a way which is helpful to the situation and not just a placebo. We're doing something because we have to do something, but we're not making much of a difference. So to act in a way which then makes a difference, which takes into account in the mandates of a peacekeeping mission, for instance, human rights aspects, aspects of women, peace and security, aspects of children in armed conflict. That is a big challenge for which we need the support of the peoples.
Tania, thank you very much indeed. Do you want to come in, Wolfgang, or shall I leave it there at that point?
For me, the most important point was that the danger for the biggest danger for human rights and liberal democracies is indifference. Indifference makes the crisis. And indifference is the background of this, what you call willful silence. Because to address the problems needs my own participation and involvement. But I feel it's better for me, it's more comfortable not to be a part of this history. And therefore, I do not address those problems. And it's too much if I try to do it alone. Therefore, we need groups of people, we need networks, we need cooperation, we need transnational friendship in order to learn to see the situation with the eyes of the other. And everyone who had the chance to do that in one place or the other, or groups who go now to Iraq to see the situation of Yazidis or Christians in the Iraq, they learn to see the situation with the eyes of the other, and they overcome indifference. And therefore, they are able to start a process in their own society to speak about the things, and therefore to press governments to be involved and to change the situation. Often you are right, things develop much quicker than those processes are going, but however we have to try it and to contribute in this way.
Right, we're just going to pause now until tomorrow morning. We're going to pick up on humanity in a fragile world. We will have a keynote, particularly from Wolfgang Ischinger, the chair of the Munich Security Conference, just to remind you that he is going to talk about the world on the edge of the abyss, his choice, not imposed on him, based on big brainstormings they've been doing over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And speaking to someone from the MSc earlier today, he did tell me that actually there were voices of optimism. So we'll wait and see what Wolfgang has got to say. Thank you.